Hello and welcome to American Friction, the US politics podcast that just won't stop talking about US politics. And don't tell us not to. I'm Chris Jones. And I'm joined by the president and the first lady of this podcast, all rolled into one. It's Nikki McCann Ramirez. Hello, Nikki.
Hello, Chris Jones. I am also head of the National Archives.
Brilliant. Well, let's get on today's episode. On June 13th, US-backed Israeli forces launched a series of attacks on Iranian nuclear sites with speculative success, we should add. And Iran retaliated with airstrikes of its own into Israel and onto US military bases in the Middle East.
It's a bit of a complicated picture, but with the warring between Israel and Iran barely being contained by a ceasefire, what role will America play in the conflict going forward? And what have we learned over the past few years about Trump's foreign policy? To help us better understand the situation, we're joined by Nahal Toosi, Politico's senior foreign affairs correspondent. Nahal, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Hey, it's great to be here.
First question. The US and Iran, they've not had formal relations for quite a long time now. I think it's about 4 decades, something like that. But, the issues go back a long way, back to, for example, the Iran-Iraqi war. Going back to Donald Trump's first term, though, in 2016, how did he manage this situation with Iran?
Well, he pursued a maximum pressure campaign against Iran. That's what they called it. That involved leaving the Iran nuclear deal that was negotiated by President Obama, but also heaping just a ton of sanctions on the Iranian government, on a variety of issues, not just nuclear related, but human rights, if I remember correctly, cyber, terrorism, all sorts of things. So he really went down hard on them. And there were some military encounters as well. He ordered the strike that killed a senior Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani, when he was in Iraq. So that's probably the big one that really, really put things on edge.
Just to come back to that nuclear deal that he pulled the US out of, could you just kind of describe what his reasoning for pulling the US out of that was, really?
Well, he said that the deal wasn't good enough.
Right.
That it was too narrow, that it had provisions that expired too soon, and that he didn't think that was appropriate. There were people who really pushed him to get out of it because they said that the deal at the end of the provisions expiring would leave Iran stronger and more able to obtain a nuclear weapon. But a lot of folks will tell you that, one other thing Trump actually also said at the time was it wasn't comprehensive enough. He said it was just about nuclear program when it should have involved everything from Iran's support for terrorism to many of its other activities, including support for proxy militias. But, a lot of folks will tell you that probably the main reason he really pulled out was because it was Barack Obama's deal.
Yes.
And Trump was bent on just reversing everything Obama had done.
What about now, then? What's his standpoint when it comes to Iran? Is it any different to compared to his first term? Is it more aggressive, perhaps?
Well, earlier, he wanted to have a new version of the Iran nuclear deal.
Right.
He was pursuing negotiations, and it was literally like there were some people who said, "Oh, this is just like the dollar store Iran nuclear deal that Obama had," which is what Trump was putting on the table. It wasn't even a comprehensive one. It was very strange. But the Israelis, as we know, have never thought that it would be a good idea to make a deal with Iran. And so they carried out the strikes, and Trump eventually got on board and sent major bombs to wipe out a good deal of Iran's nuclear program in some very difficult to reach sites. So it kind of went from diplomatic to war footing, essentially.
I want to dive in a little bit to that shift we've had from sort of the diplomatic to the war fighting. Of course, the critical third party in this dynamic is Israel. And I think that the relationship between Israel and the United States has changed significantly since the October 7th attack, since the beginning of the war against Hamas. I'd like to hear your thoughts on how the U.S.-Israeli relationship has evolved between sort of the last year and a half of Biden's term, the outbreak of the war, the beginning of Trump's, and what role that evolving relationship has had in the outburst that we had with Iran last month.
Well, oftentimes it comes down to the relationship with one guy, which is Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister. But look, the bottom line is since October 7th, 2023, the U.S. has been essentially in lockstep with Israel, supporting it virtually every step of the way. That includes under President Biden, that includes under President Trump, especially because much of the war has been focused on Gaza and fighting Hamas in Gaza, which has, of course, led to a lot of suffering for innocent Palestinian civilians. But the U.S. has sent weapons. With Biden briefly paused a couple of shipments of some weapons, but overall, the U.S. has been there for Israel. That hasn't really changed, regardless of U.S. efforts to get Israel to change certain moves, and Netanyahu essentially refusing to do so. When Trump took over, he wanted the Gaza war to end, and he still does. Like, he pushed for a ceasefire, but overall, even though part of that came together and then it fell apart, he has not really withheld any support for Israel. So Israel has been kind of being like, okay, thanks for your advice, but we're going to keep fighting because we have a different point of view on this. Now, the rest of the region, though, has been affected. Israel has been going after Hezbollah in Lebanon, and that is something the U.S. has supported as well. I mean, for different reasons. And as we saw what happened with Iran, the U.S. has also been there essentially in both administrations. Now, I think every U.S. president gets sick and tired of Benjamin Netanyahu because Netanyahu does what he wants. He has his own political interests, and he just pursues it. But at the end of the day, the U.S. has bigger interests, and protecting Israel is one of them. It is an important security partner. There's historic ties. It's the memories of the Holocaust. I mean, there's just so much there, and the idea of abandoning Israel is just anathema to any U.S. president and most Americans. One last thing I will say, though, is that, look, over time, Israel's behavior has alienated a lot of younger voters in the United States, especially on the left, but also increasingly some on the right who kind of question why we're giving so much money to Israel and whether it's really just dragging us into conflicts that we shouldn't be with. So there's an emerging divide. The kind of unstinting support for Israel that was bipartisan for so long is starting to crack a little bit when it comes to voters.
Did that moment, when Trump, I think, was leaving for Camp David, or he was standing on the South Lawn of the White House, and he basically said that, Israel and Iran had no fucking clue what they were doing, just sort of openly expressed frustration with how this had played out. Does that kind of indicate that there are tensions between, like, the United States government, the Israeli government, particularly because Prime Minister Netanyahu is expected to visit the White House. And on the heels of this, on the heels of Trump also getting on social media and just being like, hey, don't make me turn this car around, behave, what the tone of that meeting is going to be like.
Yeah, everybody is watching this. I mean, on the one hand, Netanyahu got what he wanted from Trump in the Iran military strikes, right? And he's going to come in and he is going to praise Trump. He's going to say the nicest things about him. And Trump is increasingly wise to Netanyahu's tactics, okay? But he also has other interests. He wants to protect Israel. He has other people pressuring him. So I think my guess from what we're hearing is he's going to pressure Netanyahu on bringing some sort of a ceasefire and an end to the fighting in Gaza, okay? There's already some word out about that. There's some discussions about a ceasefire agreement. And Trump, I do believe, really wants to see this fighting end. He doesn't like the messiness of these wars. But will Netanyahu just listen and then go do what he wants? Probably. And then what will he suffer at all for it? Probably not. But if there is one president who might be willing to take a move that's very unusual when it comes to Israel, it could be Trump. It really could be. You just never know with this guy.
The other dynamic I wanted to touch on in regards to Iran, in regards to sort of foreign policy in general, is the situation within the White House among Trump's own staff and cabinet. The National Security Council has been in turmoil. You wrote about it this week. The firings, the sort of inconsistency in policy. And then at the same time, you have Pete Hegseth, who seems to be constantly teetering on the edge of a full-blown rupture with the administration. How is that sort of climate, those sort of worries, affecting this administration's ability to conduct foreign policy, to, act cohesively in the Situation Room when a situation like the bombings of Iran happens?
It makes it be very reactive. It makes it have very short-term thinking, and it makes it not have very comprehensive thinking, right? So look, Iran, for instance, with Trump, Trump is saying this was basically it. We're done. We obliterated the program. He wants no more to do with this. I do not think this is over, though. I think that in the months and years ahead, there's going to be continued skirmishes. I think the Israelis are going to go back in because they're going to say, nope, we found a few traces of this and something else here, and we've got to eliminate this program completely. And I think the U.S. will have to go along with it. But also, the thing about the way that they're doing their national security policy making is they don't seem to think about how what one thing they do affects another thing, right? So, for instance, with tariffs, that is increasingly a national security issue, right? The US is imposing tariffs on everyone, including our friends in Europe. At the same time, we're telling Europeans, you need to spend more on defense, okay? The Europeans are like, okay, we want to spend more on defense, but you know what? If you tariff us, you're going to damage our economy. We're going to have less money to spend on defense. So it's these things that are just undermining one another. And I mean, my God, don't even get me started on how immigration policy is undermining things. I mean, they're not thinking comprehensively because they don't have a kind of bottom-up concept, comprehensive strategy. Instead, it's like, oh, here's a crisis right now. Let's have a handful of us meet in the West Wing and let's make this one move because the president likes it. And whatever comes tomorrow, well, we'll just deal with it then.
Just coming back to what you said there about the situation with Iran not really seeming to go away. It's very much not the end, especially when it comes to the US's involvement here. In your one of your columns that you wrote, there was headline, Trump's Iran strikes are upending our sense of what kind of president he is. You wrote this. It says, Iran has already threatened revenge, and nearly every US official I spoke to expects it will fulfill that promise. In terms of when we're using the word revenge there, what kind of things do you think that we're looking at here?
Oh, I mean, they can get pretty creative, right? I mean, first of all, you saw that they staged that attack on the U.S. military base in Qatar. That was pretty forecast, so nobody got hurt. Those missiles were intercepted, but it was a move. At the same time, the Iranians sometimes plan years and years of revenge. Assassination campaigns, for instance. They have been going after former Trump administration officials for years because of the strike against that Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani. These people still face assassination threats from Iran because of that strike years ago. Okay, they could also, I have Western intelligence officials tell me that former ones tell me there's long been like suspicions of Iranian sleeper cells in various countries that can wreak a lot of havoc if they are activated. That's pretty murky. I don't know what that could lead to, but it could mean any number of things. They could also arrest Iranian Americans, many of whom are in Iran, and put them in prison and try to use them as leverage. There's just a lot that they can do. There's also cyber. I mean, they've been trying to do cyber attacks recently. So there's just a ton of possibilities. And again, they have long memories.
Also kind of sticking with this theme of revenge and how it could come about. Trump has, well, I think the best way to describe how he's been acting is erratic and chaotic. He's acting as if he's got nothing to lose, essentially, in a lot of the decisions that he's been making. So when it comes to Iran, is the fear that he acts in the same way and the risks he takes are likely to cause an even greater backlash.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe that he really doesn't want a bigger war with Iran. Like, there's the new thing some people are talking about is this idea of a one and done doctrine, right? We go in once, we carry out a strike, we leave, it's over, right? I thought about this when I was writing that column, but I was writing that column like in the immediate hours after the US strike. And I just remember thinking, we don't know if it's done yet. It is way too soon, and he might do more. And not only that, but remember, the strike on Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general, was also, in theory, a one and done, right? But now we're striking Iran again. So these things do kind of linger. And part of the problem, I think, is there's no real diplomatic strategy with Iran. Sure, Trump says he wants to talk to them again. His envoy, Steve Witkoff, is supposedly has informal contacts. But what is the plan? What is the goal? If you sit down with them at the table, what are you going to ask of the Iranians? Right now, they're in a really low state. They don't have a lot of leverage. You could ask for a lot. You could say, beyond just nuclear stuff, you could be like, hey, we want you to stop oppressing your people. By the way, Iranian human rights oppression has gone way up since the U.S. attacks. And we could do a lot of things. But does Trump or anyone in his circle, have they sat there and mapped this out? Have they thought this through? I'd love to know. If anybody's listening and they have that plan, please get in touch.
One of the things that I keep seeing cropping up is this term regime change, and whether that's what Trump and his administration are after. And he's denied wanting that. He said regime change brings chaos, and ideally we don't want to see much chaos, which I think frankly might be bullshit on his part. Netanyahu's government has basically said that it wants the complete opposite, and it wants regime change within Iran. So does that almost set up increased, I think we mentioned it kind of before, but does this set up increased tensions between the US and Israel?
I think there's certainly a possibility that it could over time if the Israelis keep pursuing efforts to weaken the regime. I think a lot of things are misunderstood when talking about the way Israel sees Iran. A lot of folks say, well, Israel believes that Iran's nuclear program is an existential threat to Israel. But that's not what's really going on. Israel believes the regime in Iran is a threat to Israel, an existential threat. I mean, there are other countries with nuclear programs that Israel isn't that worried about, right? So this is about this particular regime. Now, does Trump want regime change? He also tweeted, "Hey, regime change might not be so bad." Yeah. I'm paraphrasing, and why wouldn't it happen if the regime treats its people badly? My sense is that the Israelis will try to keep weakening the regime, hoping perhaps that the Iranian people will somehow topple it. Trump probably isn't going to get too involved in that, but he wouldn't be surprised if that happened, and he'd probably be fine with it. I think the problem is nobody knows what would replace that regime. It could be a more militarized, even more hell-bent on getting a nuclear weapon government. We just don't know. And part of the challenge is that the Iranian diaspora has never really had a strong or organized opposition. There's not even really a person that you could turn to and say, this person genuinely could go in there and take over and have a lot of broad-based support. Not even the son of the former Shah of Iran, even though some people like to put him out there. There's just not a real alternative. And that's partly, the Iranian diaspora's fault. They spend way more time fighting each other than they do criticizing the regime.
I kind of want to lean into this idea a little bit that there is no real foreign policy strategy. I think you're touching on something super critical there, which is, in my view at least, for the Trump administration, the Trump family, diplomacy is being replaced by business relationships. I think you can see it really clearly in sort of the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the way these are the countries that are doing a lot of the negotiation on our behalf with other countries in the region. But at the same time, you have some of these states investing, billions of dollars into the Trump family's private ventures. I'm curious how that shift is affecting the goings on in the region, what we're seeing happen, how that sort of abandonment of traditional diplomatic negotiations, talks, summits is being replaced by a sort of more transactional regime of, I do this
T-word.
For you, you do the T word.
It's an interesting point. People use transactionalism as a term. I'm increasingly wondering, to be honest, though, if it's more like extortion. If the U.S. is going and saying, hey, nice, mineral earths you have there, or something. Can we have that mine? And then we'll talk to you. So look, there's, I think, two levels. One is the Trump family's own capitalization of many of these relationships. Yeah, I mean, corruption. That's a whole other podcast. Yeah. I'm not going to even, probably a podcast series. I think one exists. but that's definitely there. But I do think it's infiltrating the kind of thinking of the U.S. actual infrastructure for foreign policy as well. You see a much more commercially minded approach to our relationships overseas, whether it's to Ukraine saying, hey, we want a minerals deal, right? Or to other countries that we are trying to do certain things. We will be like, look, we'll trade with you, or insist that they trade with us if we want something from them. It's very much one of those, I think actually they've been very, very clear about this on two levels. One is the relations with countries in Africa, right? If you look at what they're doing, at first it seems like, oh my gosh, they're totally writing off Africa, right? They're completely forgetting this continent. But if you look more closely, you realize, no, they're very much switching the policies toward something where it's like, let's make a trade deal instead of giving you aid. Okay,
Yeah.
Let's talk about a joint business venture. We will help you connect with private sector entities in the U.S. Another thing is actual U.S. foreign aid in general. I mean, Secretary Rubio had a piece out just this week saying that from now on, it's going to be much more about investment that the U.S. can deem will get returns as opposed to just giving people aid. Now, his piece was not entirely fair or full of proper context on a lot of levels, but the point he was making was a good one. So you see this kind of commercial business mindset driving a lot more of what they do. The problem is when you strong arm people and you don't put it in the bigger context of like, what can this country actually offer? What can it do? And what are we doing to undermine them? It's like, if you want to have a trade deal or do a more commercial approach, fine. But tariffs, that's just undermining your point. So the contradictions are endless, absolutely endless. I feel sorry for like the historians who are going to write about this era. They're going to be
who have to unpack
confused.
this shit.
Yeah.
I think you're correct. Like, if you put it in the global context of like Africa, Latin America, in those spaces where the Trump administration is abandoning soft power, their theoretical, adversaries, enemies, China, are stepping in and saying, we will make up this gap. China has been exponentially increasing their investments, like especially technologically in Africa and Latin America, South and Central America over the last decade and a half. And it's interesting to see the U.S. kind of throw in the towel on this. Trump present himself as a peacemaker, deserving of the Nobel Prize, while at the same time, you do have sort of this like machista focus on lethality from the Department of Defense, the airstrikes in Iran, the inability to secure a sort of end to the wars, both in Gaza and in Ukraine. And it just, like, I think what you're touching on is completely correct, that so much of this administration is undermining its own positioning, that it's just creating quagmires.
Yeah, I mean, this is happening over and over again. And again, immigration policy, that in and of itself is doing so much to undermine so much of our relations. One thing I will say also is that there's a big difference between what China can offer commercially and what the U.S. can offer commercially.
Oh, absolutely.
China's state can control its companies and say, hey, company A, guess what? You're going to be investing in Lesotho, right? But we have a private sector that kind of does its own thing. And while Trump is doing more than most when it comes to presidents strong-arming the private sector, at the end of the day, the U.S. government doesn't really control them. It can try to incentivize them, but who are they going to get to invest in Lesotho? They have their own shareholder interest to think about. So it's a very different game, and we have not been very good at playing it in the long run. And you could very much argue that we should have been better at playing it. But they're just, but again, they're doing tariffs at the same time. So it's mind-boggling. It's
tariffs will fix it.
I have people. I've had people come to me like, you should write a book. You should. And I'm just like, why? Do you think I'm nuts? Like, no. Like my mental health is already like fragile enough. Like, you want me to go into this and figure out
where would one even begin?
And what would be like, what would be something that doesn't lose any relevance 5 minutes from now? You could write something that's true. The thing about the Trump era is everything can be true for 5 minutes and then completely untrue 5 minutes later, or sometimes rare, but does happen, things are both true and not true at the same time. That is the most mind-boggling thing.
I mean, yeah, we know all about that in terms of having to do a podcast that doesn't come out instantly after we record it. We've had to change so many episodes just to make it actually make sense. When you're covering, I mean, foreign policy, when there's things that are happening so quickly, but are also so ultra complicated that you have to look into all of these things separately. Like, how do you do it? And like, you must be ultra stressed.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I got a note the other day from our HR people reminding me that I had not taken any vacation this year, and and I was like, I haven't had time. It's the Trump era. Look, how do I do it? I just kind of acknowledge to myself that I cannot capture everything in every piece, and that the body of work I pursue is over time going to be more comprehensive than just perhaps one story. So sometimes I'll write a story or a column and people will be like, oh, but you forgot this, this, and this. And I'll be like, okay, yeah, but that I wrote about that 3 weeks ago, or that is next on my list, I promise. You just kind of have to accept that you're not going to be able to capture everything every time, but you have to keep trying. And I think the most important thing is for me, I feel like there's so many people who are writing about the same things, over and over again. I always try to find the different angle or look at something people are not looking at, so that I stand out and add to the knowledge and add to the conversation instead of just repeat it.
And then just finally, Nahal, on foreign policy as a whole and bringing it back home, back to America, when you look at Trump's foreign policy and the lack of strategy, as we've pointed out really in this episode, how is that impacting Trump's popularity, I guess, not just amongst voters and people who would usually vote for Trump, but within the GOP as well? And I'm not talking about inside MAGA world who, like kiss his feet every day and tell him that he's the greatest boy ever. But in terms of those who are on the fringes, who are prepared to kind of go against Trump in certain ways, how is this lack of clarity, this lack of direction when it comes to foreign policy really working out for Trump?
Look, overall, it seems like he's going down in the polls among a lot of folks who are on the fence, that he's not doing as well as he did before. But I think part of the challenge is foreign policy itself does not tend to be a major driver of voters' attitudes or decision making. So it's really hard to break that down specifically, unless you kind of want to go, well, Ukraine did this, but immigration is doing this. So it's really hard to say. I think part of the challenge is that we're not going to know the outcome of some of these things for quite a while.
Yeah.
It's quite possible we won't know the real outcome of some of the decisions they're making now until the next president. And that president is going to get the fallout and probably get the blame, because voters don't have like, object permanence sometimes. there's like
how thrilling.
Who was Trump? We have a new president now. We must blame him. So it's very tricky. And I don't know. It's sometimes he looks strong, sometimes he looks weak. He's never a clear image. Yeah.
Well, if he had it his way, I'm sure maybe he would be the next president. But let's see how that one goes and never bring it up again. Nahal, thanks so much for joining us. We love talking to you.
Oh, it's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
And listeners, it's more than great to have you with us too. Without you, we wouldn't have a show, and conversations like this wouldn't see the light of day. If you'd like that to continue as much as we do, well, there's an easy solution. Simply back us on Patreon. It's as little as £3 a month. And for that, you'll get our episodes ad-free and access to our exclusive merchandise. And there's more. Our £5 a month tier will get you access to our Patreon chat community, where you can ask us and each other questions about, well, the madness of US politics, so that we can all get a better understanding of what's going on. Simply go to patreon.com/American Friction to find out more. There's a link in the show notes. I'm Chris Jones, and you've been listening to American Friction.